Okay, so let's talk a little bit about data design. Your first step is to figure out what database you want to use. This website lists some of the top database engines according to popularity. The top ones are all SQL based. Mongo's up there. I've used, Redis and Elasticsearch I've used, but not as a primary data store. They're just supplemental in my opinion. So as far as your primary data store goes, I've used SQL at more than one company, and it works great. It's very dynamic. You can use it for all kinds of stuff. You can, as long as you've indexed things properly and you're doing your foreign keys properly, you can join tables efficiently. You can query things really quickly. I've had tables that have millions or tens of millions of rows, and you can do joins and grab data out of there in like 3 milliseconds. Super fast. It scales just fine. If you get to huge amounts of data, there might be some theoretical cap where you might have to start doing some wonky stuff. But at that point, you have a huge company, huge team, people can figure it out. For the majority of companies that I have worked at or probably ever will work at, I think SQL works great, and that's my personal preference above other databases that I've seen. But obviously, as you're having these discussions, you can talk about what tools the team is already familiar with. If everybody is used to using Mongo, then it's probably worth just using something people are familiar with. If you use a core set of tools that everybody knows well, people can get really good at them and you can move quickly. So these are the kinds of discussions you want to have. But what database do we want to use? SQL, Mongo, something else? If it's a non-relational database, how are you going to manage relationships amongst data? Because data is relational by nature. Things interact with other things. That's just how data works. So for instance, in our e-commerce site, if I'm going to list different things for sale, we need to be able to keep track of what I've listed for sale versus what you've listed for sale. So those product listings belong to a user. Data is relational by nature. It's important to think about batch operations that you can leverage, and that kind of is more part of your coding, I guess. It's not really data design, but it's important to think about. If it's a database that has a defined schema like SQL, then how are you going to manage schema migrations? You can use a tool that does it for you. Like if you're using Node.js, which I will be using in my later examples, you can use TypeORM. If you're using TypeScript, which I would highly recommend, TypeORM can manage your schema migrations. If you're using Postgres, you can use Prisma. If you're using PHP, you can use something like Phoenix or Phoenix, Phinx. I think it's called Phoenix. I've used that in the past. That's worked great. And then if you're going to have to migrate data from one table to another, it's also important to think about how are we going to do that? Where are we going to store those? Are we going to have scripts? If so, are we going to keep track of scripts that we've run in the past in case we need to refer back to them? What indexes do we need in order to query our data efficiently? And in order to figure that out, you need to know your access patterns. What data do we need, and in what way do we need it? Do we need to query the users by email? If so, we need an index on the email column, etc., etc. So these are things to think about. Let's jump into a quick example for our little e-commerce app that we've talked about. For that app, here's the entities that I see us needing. We need users because you need to be able to log into the app. Users need to be able to create product listings, and those belong to a user. If you're going to be able to shop on the site and add things to your cart and check out, then you need a shopping cart, and that'll just keep track of items. The shopping cart belongs to a user, but it'll also keep track of which product listing items are in the cart. If you can interact with the seller, like if you can message them and talk about things, then you need to have message threads. So within a given message thread will be a bunch of messages. But if I message this seller and this seller, those are two different threads, and the messages need to be tracked separately for those interactions. So we need a relationship table, user message threads that keeps track of which users are part of which threads. That'll be a many-to-many relationship. And then you need a messages table, and messages belong to a thread. So within a thread, you'll have a bunch of messages. And then if there's two users that are part of the same thread and they both open that thread up and are looking at it, they might have both read different messages, or they might have seen or not seen different messages. So you might need to keep track per user per message. You might need a table, like a user messages table that keeps track of users' interactions with specific messages. And that could be reactions like emojis. It could be if I've seen the message or not, that kind of stuff. It might be nice to be able to see my purchase history. What did I purchase? And within a given order, what items did I purchase? So your purchase history is maybe just, here's an order ID and here's the date you purchased it on, here's the grand total. Then if you click into it, maybe you can see the line items, meaning maybe in that order I purchased 3 different things. I want to see what those 3 things are, right? So these are the different entities that I've thought of off the top of my head, and here's how I might set those tables up. For the users table, you need an ID, you need a first name and a last name, email and password to log in, phone number, maybe you don't need that, I don't know, that's just something I kind of popped in there. Product listings, it belongs to a user, so it needs a user ID. The product listing needs a name and a description, a price, and how many are available. Maybe this guy's selling 5 sets of tools, selling 1 car. You might need like an images table if there's images of the product. I didn't think about that. I haven't added a table for that yet, but for the shopping cart table, you have your user ID, your product ID, and how many there are. Obviously, if you're using SQL, you can do a join right there and join on this ID, and you can see the name and the description and the price and all that stuff. But in my shopping cart, maybe I've picked this item and added 2 to my shopping cart. So the shopping cart just is a high-level overview of what's in the cart. It keeps track of that. Message threads. There might be a better way to organize some of this that I haven't thought of, but I think this is an okay way, and especially for something like SQL where you could do joins so easily, I think this is a fine way where your message thread is an entity and you're just going to keep track of it as an entity, even though we're not really tracking any other data about it. That's okay. The messages themselves will live within a thread. So here you're going to have your different message thread IDs that these messages are part of. So when you want to, and I kind of skipped this one. So this is keeping track of which users are part of which message thread. So maybe when the profile opens up and there's a little like an email icon at the top, and if I click on it, it'll show a little drop down with all of the threads I'm a part of. If that's the product design, then we need a way to get all of the message threads a user's part of. So you would query this table by user ID, and then you can join these message threads, and maybe if they have names or something, there'd be like a name here. I don't know, I'm just kind of spitballing here. But you can get a list of all the message threads for a given user. And then if you open a message up, within the message, you can query by the message thread ID and get all of the messages that are part of that thread. And these would be different, like, hey there, is this still for sale? I don't know, like, the content that was sent within the message. And then you have this table where if 2 people are part of the same thread and they both open it up, maybe they've seen different messages or reacted to different messages differently. And so per user, per message, you need a table that keeps track of, if this is keeping track of maybe the date that they saw a given message, or if they haven't read it yet or not, something like that. For the purchase history, sorry, this is jumping all over the place. There we go. Purchase history. You're going to have a user ID. So, if I've made multiple purchases, there'd be multiple rows with my user ID. So you can query by user ID and see all of the purchase history. And you can see the purchase date and how much it was. And then maybe you click on that and it opens up a new screen and you can see what was involved in that purchase. So then you're going to query by the order ID on this other table and get all of the items that were included in that purchase. And, this is something you might have to think about with your data design is, should I just have a product listing ID and do a join? Well, that might seem great, but then can users delete product listings? If so, then do we just mark it as deleted, but we don't actually get rid of it so we can still do this join? Or if we're actually going to remove the product listing from that other table, what information do we need to grab right now to stick on this history table, so that if that product listing goes away and we can't do a join, then we need that data already ready to go here. So these are the kinds of things you might need to think about. But that's basically it. And once you start actually building this and interacting with the application, you're going to find things that you hadn't thought about. You need to add a column, delete a column, whatever, and that's totally fine. That's expected. It's normal. But before you get going, it's smart to kind of sit down and draw some of this stuff out so that you kind of have a general direction and everybody's headed in the same direction. So if you do this as a team, or if one person comes up with it and then shows it to the team and everybody can, tweak it or whatever, and then everybody knows what you're going to be building. So this is This is kind of how I would do a little e-commerce app like this, and then as you get going, maybe you add a couple things or change a couple things, but this is basically it. And then after this, you're ready to start building some code around this, and I will talk more about that in the next video.